Hi everyone, so recently I did an electronic music workshop where I covered vocoders, and the kids who participated in it were super excited about vocal synthesis. They were saying, this is awesome, it sounds weird but cool and funky, and I'm gonna drive my parents absolutely insane with this at home. To which I replied, yeah, of course, vocoders are super fun. Everyone needs a vocoder. And saying that gave me a flashback to actually when Robert Henke, who's the co-founder of Ableton and the co-developer of Live, made a really glorious statement.
No, no one needs a vocoder. No one. That's unthinkable. A vocoder is a really exotic effect.
Yeah.
I can't see that someone is using it.
This was before Live 8, and of course, eventually the Ableton team had to follow up, so they had this.
No one needs a vocoder. No one needs a vocoder. No one needs a vocoder. No one needs a vocoder.
But yeah, on a serious note, vocoders are great parts of music technology. In this video, I'm going to briefly describe how vocoders work in general on a broader scale, and then we're going to take a narrower look at the vocoder device in Live 10. So you can find vocoders in many contemporary songs since the invention of the vocoder. They're just one example of vocal synthesis or vocal effects that are included in musical compositions. Sometimes orally, they're confused with things like talk boxes and actual speech synthesizers like Vocaloid, which are also cool themselves, but they work a little bit differently from vocoders. With vocoders, we are concerned with two sources of sound. One of the sounds is called the carrier, and I like to think of it as the body of sound, or what carries the sound. If I were to come up with a sentence that said, I want my voice to sound like blank, then blank is your carrier. The other sound is called the modulator, and to modulate something means to modify it or to control it. So the modulator, when we use vocoder as a vocal effect, is the voice. Looking back to our sentence, I want my voice to sound like blank, if blank is your carrier, then your voice is the modulator. So with that general knowledge, let's take a closer look at Live's native vocoder. Right now we're in session view in Live 10, and I've pulled up an empty MIDI track and an empty audio track. You can ignore the track that says Claire. That's mainly for me to just monitor myself and hear things. Let's use our sentence, I want my voice to sound like blank, as a starting point for us to set up vocoder in Live. I want my audio track here to take in my vocal input, so I'm going to rename it modulator. After this, I'm going to add the vocoder device, which is under audio effects, to the modulator track. So head over to audio, pull over vocoder, and there it is. So right off the bat, we notice a few things. And on the top left corner of the device, we see a familiar word, carrier. Yay! Choosing different carriers will allow you to change how the body of your vocoder sounds like. By default, the carrier is set to something called noise. So let's hear what happens when I arm the audio track and we hear what vocoder sounds like at the moment. Check, 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 check. I'm vocoding. This is vocoder. As you might have guessed, it sounds pretty noisy, and that's really because my carrier, my main body of sound, is based on noise. And vocoder is using its internal noise oscillator, and this is an interesting sound, but it's different from how we might want a vocoder to sound like in our music. So let's try using another carrier. I'm just gonna unarm the track at the moment. From my experience, I found that lots of Live's native synth key patches work really great as starting points for vocoder. So I'm just gonna demonstrate this with one of my personal favorites. It's called Polyjuno Square. There it is, typed it into the search bar. Gonna drag it on the MIDI track. So now if I arm the track and if I play something on my keyboard, yay, we have sound. I'm just gonna quickly rename that track carrier. Now if we go back to the modulator audio track and if we check out vocoder's carrier section, let's look at our options again. So let's click on the drop-down menu. We notice we have a couple of things. I'm going to pick external. At the audio from section, I'm going to select carrier in capital letters. Right now, I'm going to click on the track activator button of the carrier track to kind of mute it, and I'm going to also arm the modulator track. And we see some kind of vocal thing going on, but we don't necessarily hear something until I play the keys, and this is what will sound like. Check, 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 this is vocoder, woo! You'll notice
And now my voice is sounding like a Juno.
Awesome, so that's basically how you get Vocoder up and running for some neat vocal synthesis in live. But there are still many parts to the Vocoder device itself. Before I go through the rest of Vocoder, I just wanted to share some tips on pre-Vocoder vocal processing. So basically what to do with the vocal input before it gets to Vocoder. I tend to use a couple of audio effects, and usually I start with a gate. So let's drag a gate. Let's just use most of the default settings for now, and just arbitrarily, I'm going to set the threshold to -40. After that, I tend to have an EQ to roll off the lower end of my input signal. So high pass filter around 150 Hertz. Also going to deactivate the other bands that I'm not using at the moment. After the EQ, I will usually compress my vocal a little, so throw on the compressor. Let's give a ratio of 5:1. I'm also going to put the threshold around where my voice is coming in, so that's right now around -29. Maybe -30. Cool. So now that that's done, I'm going to go through some of the Vocoder device's other features. The Enhance button next to Carrier will generally give you a brighter sound, which could be something that you want. Or maybe it's something that you don't want if you're layering your Vocoder sound with, say, a brighter sounding patch. Also in the Carrier section, apart from choosing Noise and External as options, you can also choose Modulator, which will make the Vocoder use the modulator as the carrier, so almost self-carrying. Or you can also choose Pitch Tracking, which enables Vocoder's oscillator that will attempt to follow the pitch of the modulator. So it almost turns your voice into a synthesizer. Below that section, the unvoiced knob is definitely something I'd encourage you to play with if having an intelligible vocoder sound is something that you need, as opposed to just having the vocoder layered with other sounds or layered with a cleaner lead vocal, for example. If you bring it up, you will up the volume of Vocoder's unvoiced noise generator, and immediately you can kind of hear a little bit of that coming through. When we talk about unvoiced sounds in speech, we're usually referring to more noise-like sounds in English. So s, f, p. And these don't really involve the vocal cords vibrating as much as voiced sounds like b, v, g, j. Those tend to really involve more of the vocal cords vibrating. But without nerding out completely, vocoders typically have their own system for generating unvoiced sounds that use a noise generator. So this is what this is, and you can hear that now. Just going to bring that back down. The sensitivity control affects how sensitive vocoders' detection of the unvoiced material is going to be. So the higher the percentage, the more you'll hear of the vocoder noise generator that I just showed you, and the lower the percentage, the more you'll hear of the material based on the carrier. This button over here that says fast by default is actually for how quickly vocoder will switch between analyzing the voiced sounds and the unvoiced sounds. If you toggle the button, it'll switch to something that says slow, and that could actually potentially give you a different sound depending on how your unvoiced settings are. So let's play with this a bit for a moment. I'm going to set unvoiced to -10, sensitivity to maybe 80, and we'll do a slow unvoiced speed. So now my vocoder sounds like this, and you can definitely hear more of the sibilant sounds coming through. And those are, again, from the internal noise generator of vocoder. Now, the giant black box in the middle of the device, that's actually a filter bank, which is basically a group of filters, specifically bandpass filters. A bandpass filter only lets a specific range of frequencies pass through, hence the name bandpass, letting a band pass through. When you hover over the filter bank, your cursor will change to a pencil icon that's actually very similar to going into draw mode. Using the pencil and dragging over the filter bank will allow you to basically draw and pick which bands you'd like to hear more of or less of. This would be a pretty good setting if I wanted more mid-range.
And now we have like a more mid-rangey sound. It's a little bit different from the timbre that we heard earlier.
Or if I wanted some low end, maybe I draw another shape. And now my vocoder sounds like this, which is a lot more subdued, and it's definitely something that sits well if you're layering it with a clean vocal. We have a couple more controls in the filter bank area. So bands lets you choose how many bands or bandpass filters you're using, and generally more bands results in more accuracy, but it also does take up more CPU, so that's something to keep in mind. Range will let you set the highest and the lowest frequencies of the filter bank. BW stands for bandwidth, so it lets you select how narrow each of the bands are. The precise button is again another of those toggles, and if you click on it, you'll get retro. These are essentially two modes that Vocoder has as a device. Gate, in this case, is specific to vocoder's bands after the vocal input has been analyzed and vocoded. So any bands that are quieter than whatever you set the gate threshold to will not be heard in the vocoder sound. That can leave a pretty interesting timbre sometimes. So now I'm just trying to arbitrarily scatter some values around. I'm going to set my gate to -10 within the filter bank, and let's see how it sounds like. Check it out. That definitely has a different timbre, and this can be really interesting as a sound design tool. And level, of course, just controls the overall output volume of vocoder. To the right of the filter bank, we have more parameters. Depth is another knob that I play with a lot, and it essentially affects how deeply your carrier will be affected by the modulator. So lower values of that will make the vocoder sound more like just the original carrier.
Here is the default setting that we started with.
If I bring depth all the way down, this is what we get. I'm still saying stuff, but it's definitely not coming through as words as clearly. Below that, the attack knob affects how much time vocoder takes to respond to the modulator. And the release knob affects the duration that the bands in the filter bank will hold their sound before becoming completely quiet again. The mono, stereo, and LR section is a little bit muddy at first glance to understand in terms of naming convention, because these words don't really tell us a lot about what the selection is making to change vocoder's sound. The idea is that if you click on mono, both the carrier and the modulator are in mono. If you are in LR mode, both the carrier and the modulator are in stereo. But with stereo, which is the in-between, the modulator is in mono, but the carrier is in stereo. So it's kind of like a middle ground between LR and mono. Formant is another parameter that I have loads of fun with. What it's doing under the hood is shifting the frequencies that are covered by the filter bank. I would say it has a clearly audible effect on the tonality of the vocoder. So with positive values, you end up getting a more high and chipmunky sound. And with lower values, you tend to get a more thundery and low type of sound. And right below that, the dry wet knob is something that will allow you to control the mix of how much or how little of the clean modulator you'd like to hear mixed in with the vocoder and vice versa. So yes, that's the vocoder device in Live 10, and I really hope this video was useful to you. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, or if you know a friend who might need some vocoder action, feel free to send this video along to them, and I'll see y'all next time.